Hey everyone, welcome back to the Chain Reaction Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Shaughnessy, a co-founder at Delphi Digital, where we're 5 full-time analysts focused on institutional crypto research. If you aren't a subscriber, you're missing out, so visit the site while you're listening. One quick housekeeping item. This podcast is strictly informational and educational and is not investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any tokens or securities or to make any financial decisions. I may personally own tokens that are mentioned on the podcast, and you can view the show notes for our full disclosures. Side note, as the podcast has grown, we're looking for a lead sponsor. If you're interested, DM me or tweet me on Twitter for more information. With that out of the way, today I'm thrilled to have on Nick White, the co-founder of Harmony Protocol. Harmony is described as a fast and secure blockchain, and it leverages a lot of newer tech, such as proof of stake, sharding, and cross-shard communications. Granted, not all of this tech is fully launched yet. We discuss Harmony's ultimate goal to create an open infrastructure for the world's data, a global scale marketplace platform, competition, Harmony's IEO on Binance, and so much more. Nick was an awesome guest. I hope you enjoy, and please share the episode on Twitter. Let's jump in. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm thrilled to have on Nick White, the co-founder of Harmony Protocol. Nick, how's it going?
Hey Tom, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a real fan of Delphi Digital and the work that you do, especially this podcast. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So Nick, let's dive right into it. Give us your background and how you got started in crypto.
Sure. So I grew up in Hawaii. I actually went to the same high school as Obama. And I'm part Native Hawaiian, even though I may not look like it on the outside, because I'm blonde and blue-eyed. But I then went to Stanford, where I studied electrical engineering, and I focused in adaptive signal processing and neural networks. And I thought about doing a PhD, but I ended up just getting my bachelor's and master's. And then I headed out to Hong Kong to work at a global AI incubator called Zeroth AI. And when we were there, we invested in a bunch of different early stage AI startups from all around the world. And it was a really good experience and kind of introduced me to the global innovation ecosystem. But at that time, I also started to get interested in blockchain and Bitcoin. And I had first learned about it back at Stanford. I overheard a conversation in the dining hall about people mining Bitcoin. And I looked on Mt. Gox and saw, it's like traded. It was very confusing to me at the time. And honestly, I was a little bit turned off because it felt very scammy, but blockchain started to kind of come back into my life around that time. I read a book called Industries of the Future, which mentioned blockchain as one of the top 4 emerging industries for the 21st century. So I figured it was something that I should pay attention to. And so I started reading all these different books. I had recently got onto Twitter to follow a bunch of AI researchers. And ironically, I started just following a lot of the crypto Twitter and falling deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole until eventually I decided that I needed to quit my job and make a move into blockchain. So around that same time is when I met Steven, who's my co-founder, and he was working on some of the early ideas that became Harmony, and he convinced me to join as a co-founder.
Wow, that was a great lunch to overhear and definitely worth the time. So give us the elevator pitch on Harmony, and we'll dive into the technical aspects throughout the episode, but just set the stage for what Harmony is at a high level.
Yeah, so Harmony's broad vision is to scale trust for billions of people and to create a radically fair economy. And the way that we think that we can do that is by building a high throughput blockchain that supports smart contracts and will be able to scale to the level of adoption that I think will be necessary for blockchain to actually have a real world impact. Our team is, really skilled and diverse. We have engineers from Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon. Some of our business people are graduates from Harvard Business School. So we bring a lot of industry experience to this problem, and we're very execution oriented. We work 996 hours, which is 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, at least, sometimes 997, as we have in the past few months. And our CEO and founder, Steven, he actually got a PhD in computer science with a focus in language and compilers. And he started working at Google and eventually founded a search map search startup that was acquired by Apple. And on the surface, he seems like a normal guy. He's very friendly and outgoing, but on the inside, he's a serious geek and hardcore computer scientist. He's even written his own programming language. But going into what Harmony is, we feel that a lot of the solutions to many of the hard problems have been found, and now it's more about combining them in the right way and implementing them. And we're trying to leverage our infrastructure engineering expertise from the large tech companies where we've all been working to actually turn these research ideas into production. So that's kind of where we come in. And I think the primary direction that everyone's kind of converged on recently, in terms of how to scale blockchain, is to combine proof of stake and sharding. So we are along that similar vein of several different notable projects that are trying to scale blockchain in that direction.
It's a great overview. So I think that there's a lot of confusion for new people in the space among throughput and transactions per second and what that actually means while maintaining decentralization, because that's the key point of what we're all working on here. So how do you guys approach scalability while maintaining decentralization? Because a lot of other blockchains like EOS and Tron claim higher transactions per second, but they trade off that decentralization.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I think many sharding protocols would give you a similar answer, which is that sharding is sort of the best approach that we know of so far to scale while maintaining decentralization. And the reason that it's able to do that is because of certain breakthroughs and ways of creating committees. But to take a step back with what sharding is, it's basically an approach that allows you to create parallel blockchains. So it parallelizes the consensus process and allows those blockchains that are running side by side to communicate with each other and coordinate. So you kind of have a macro chain of chains kind of concept. And parallelization overcomes the bottleneck in that any single chain will always kind of slow down as you add more participants. But in a sharded chain, as you add more people, you're actually able to add more shards and therefore increase the overall throughput of the network. And the way this maintains decentralization, because you're not, instead of in EOS's case, you're limiting the number of block producers or participants in consensus, because you're trying to, by keeping the number of participants lower, you're able to keep from slowing down by adding new participants. In sharding, instead, it's you keep a constant side of participants per shard, but you have many, many, many shards. So there are thousands of participants overall. Hopefully that answers the question to some degree. I'm happy to dive in and clarify anything.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And what's your take on other protocols implementing sharding, though, like at the base layer? Because a lot of other platforms like Ethereum and Bitcoin are working on a lot of layer 2 solutions to build on top of the first layer to increase throughput, whether it be for payments or data. What's like the holdback on just doing this on layer 1 like you guys are with sharding? Is it because you're building it from the ground up and they already have existing blockchains and it would be hard to like reorient them? Or what's like the issue with existing blockchains implementing sharding today?
At least in terms of, should we try to increase throughput and performance at layer 1 versus layer 2? I think the answer is both. In a lot of ways, they're kind of, it's apples and oranges. And so by increasing, the throughput on layer 1, you can still add layer 2 on top of it. So they're not necessarily exclusive. And another aspect is that they can actually offer different kinds of performance. I don't think, we'll ever get, instant finality for layer 1. But on layer 2, you can actually have some features like that. Like Lightning is really fast settlement. So I think a combination of them in the end will be better. But at the end of the day, if it's possible to build a blockchain that is as secure as the existing layer 1 blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, but to have thousands of times the throughput and to be able to scale and add more throughput as necessary, then I think that is very valuable, no matter how you look at it. So that's why I think sharding is still valuable and will be an approach that will continue to grow as we move forward in the industry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So how is it working on your network today? I mean, you guys recently launched your mainnet, and we can go back and forth with the technical items and where they play into your mainnet. But, how has sharding been on your mainnet so far? Is everything working as planned, or are there any metrics on transactions per second or throughput and number of nodes that you could share possibly so that we can get a better picture of how this is all working?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we just launched what we call our day one mainnet. And it makes us the first chain to actually ship sharding and proof of stake together. But we're starting with the basics first. So first of all, our goal with this was to build a validator community, because I think that's a blockchain is not just the code and the code base; it's the whole organization of all the people behind it who are running nodes and so forth. So building a validator community is a huge sort of step. And we're really pleased with the reception. We have over 150 external nodes and validators running on our current mainnet, and they're collecting real block rewards in one tokens. So we already have kind of gotten the economic incentives in gear, and it's working really well. The other goal of the network, this mainnet, is to establish and test stability. So we just want to make sure that everything is working the way that we want it to, and that if we kill off nodes, that the network doesn't crash, consensus doesn't stall. If we kill off the leader, that the leader change protocol works. And so far, all of that is working extremely well. And we've also implemented a lot of different tech milestones. So we have our fast Byzantine fault tolerant consensus that uses BLS multi-signatures. It's an improvement. It's a flavor of PBFT that is more efficient because of the use of BLS multi-signatures to aggregate the votes. And also our view change protocol. We're one of the first, if not the first, to implement an actual PBFT view change protocol and actually have it work live in the network. But there are some key features that are not enabled yet because this is a staged mainnet release. So we don't have token transfers. There's no smart contract support yet. And the plan is essentially over the coming months to add more validators, to add more shards, to enable cross-shard transactions, to actually do the token swap, because right now the tokens on the mainnet are separate from the BEP2 tokens that we issued with Binance. And we'll release a full SDK, and it's all about sort of the gradual release and testing the basics with this first launch, and then add more functionality, more complexity with each release. And we'll be releasing something new every month and a half to 2 months.
That's great. Yeah, it's definitely the safer way to go about it. And, you're able to test everything in real time then. Have you been able to see like the throughput itself with your mainnet launch? Like, are you able to do?
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's a really good question. So right now we're not testing the throughput because we haven't allowed token transfers. That's not to say that we won't be testing it on a parallel testnet. And we've done, I think last year everyone was really obsessed with TPS as the key metric. And so we also kind of fell into that and ended up running a massive test network. We spun up over 41,000 nodes, and we ended up getting around 118,000 TPS. And so we felt that we validated some of our technology and assumptions as far as throughput goes in that test network. And since then we haven't really focused too heavily on actually testing the throughput. I think one advantage that we will have taking this approach is that having a more live public network will enable us to do more realistic testing. Because I think one of the things that stops blockchain researchers from being able to make valid claims is that whenever you're experimenting or trying to prove the throughput of your protocol, you're usually working on a simulation, either a local one, which you don't have any of the network complexities, or it's your own network that doesn't have any actual external validators. So you can't really test your technology in a real setting. But with this mainnet launch, we'll actually be able to get some real results. So that will be coming soon. But we don't have any results right now.
No, that's fair enough. And, I just to pick apart one point, though, I mean, cross-shard communication is definitely one of the, in my opinion, like one of the major concerns or one of the major footholds on really getting sharding to work. And I know the Ethereum developers have spent a ton of time trying to figure this out, because if the shards can't talk to each other, it kind of negates the whole point of sharding and paralyzing the compute. What are your guys' thoughts on cross-shard communication? And have you guys done any tests on your testnet, or I'm assuming not on the mainnet launch yet?
That's a really good question. And there are lots of different approaches that people are taking. In some ways, I think we've yet to see a really comprehensive, amazing ace in the hole solution. But I don't think that means that we won't find one in time. For us, in terms of cross-shard transactions, we've done some innovation in terms of how to actually route the cross-shard transactions in an efficient way, so that they don't have to go to every shard in between. And we use something that's called Kademlia routing, which is used in a lot of different distributed networks, like similar to BitTorrent. And so that at least makes the cross-shard routing more efficient. But the issue with cross-shard transactions is not necessarily when you're moving assets, but it comes more into question when you are having smart contracts that interact with each other across shards. And that kind of falls into the whole data availability problem. And there are some proposals for solutions, but as of right now, there's not anything good. So we're still keeping abreast. We have our own approach that we've called causal consistency. So it favors liveness over consistency, but we try to maintain what we call causal consistency, which is when the shard makes a decision about something, a smart contract, it uses the latest state that it knows is legitimate, and there's sort of like this causal path. So hopefully that helps answer some of the question. But yeah, I think sharding still has some unanswered questions, but hopefully, I think we'll need, even one shard will probably have 1,000 TPS or more. And so before we need to start really scaling cross shard, I think that it'll still, take a while before that becomes a crucial problem. And my gut feeling is that a solution will come within that time.
That makes sense, and those are all fair points. And just on your timeline itself, Mahalo, one of my followers on Twitter, and he's a close friend, and he's definitely a kick-ass researcher as well. He had a couple of questions, and you've answered a few so far, but I think two of the questions he has is, what do you think the timeline is for shard number increases? So, going from 4 shards, which I think you have now in your mainnet, to more, and then more on the cross-shard transaction timeline itself, where these shards are actually speaking to one another.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in our next release, we're going to increase the validators per shard, and we're going to enable cross-shard transactions. So that should be in the next couple of months. And then in the further release is when we're actually going to increase the number of shards from 4 to 6 and enable smart contracts and all of that. And in the future, the shard count will be, able to be modified via, on-chain governance. So, if it seems like, all the shards are overly congested, then we can enter into the phase of starting to spin up new shards. So that's sort of the timeline for all of that.
Got it. That makes sense. And we're in the tech, so we might as well stick with the technical type questions. So we talked about sharding, which is one of your main selling points with Harmony. Let's go on to proof of stake. And you guys have an interesting spin on proof of stake. So how do you guys approach consensus? And what's this adaptive threshold for people that aren't aware?
That's a really good question. So I think people often call proof of work and proof of stake actual consensus algorithms. I think of them more as the sort of Sybil resistance layer, and then the consensus is either in proof of work's case the longest chain, or in proof of stake it's you can use PBFT, or it depends on the particular model that you choose. In our case, we chose to use PBFT because it is really battle tested, well understood, and quite efficient consensus algorithm. But the one issue with it is the fact that it doesn't scale to many participants very well, because as you add more participants, you have to pass more and more signatures to verify the block. And as each signature adds more load to the communication. But by using BLS multi-signatures, one of the cool aspects of BLS is that you can aggregate multi-signatures into a constant size signature. So all of a sudden, that linearly scaling, overhead of all the signatures you have to pass around becomes constant size. So it really makes the PBFT consensus more efficient and faster, even as you add more participants. So that's one of the key ways that we've shaped our consensus. And the adaptive threshold that you're mentioning it relates to the way that we select validators, which is that there will be it's sort of we rather than having each node be a specific validator, there's this concept of having voting shares, and the voting shares get split evenly between the shards. But if you have multiple voting shares in a given shard, you can actually just run one node to vote on behalf of you. So it reduces the overall cost of operating the network.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And, for someone who's definitely not a dev, but I try and ask the right questions here, what are your thoughts on, the adaptive working the other way? Like, is there a way in which like a small group of people could influence decisions? Like, I think this might also be a concern on Polkadot, but I'm wondering your take there.
So are you wondering about the sort of centralization of power on proof of stake protocols?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern, and that's why we felt it was important for us to do an IEO, because we felt that ICOs fundamentally aren't broken. In fact, I think capital formation is one of the killer apps of crypto, and it's really especially important for proof of stake chain, because unlike proof of work, where in some ways it's permissionless, you can go out and buy the hardware and mine and earn your way into the protocol. In proof of stake, the big holders, if they don't, distribute some of their holdings, then they can just maintain a monopoly over the whole protocol. So I think, that was one of the main motivations for us to do an IEO, and hopefully, that would help us, establish a much more diversified and distributed token table and holding, so that, in the future we avoid such a circumstance. But it is true. And luckily we're not DPoS, we are true POS, and there shouldn't be very large economies of scale for people who are running validators. So, and we've purposely designed the protocol such that it's very low barrier to entry if you want to actually participate in consensus and earn block rewards. You won't need a high spec machine to mine. You can just mine on the cloud, or even with a pretty basic computer, you should be able to participate. So that was on purpose, to keep it decentralized and keep it from falling into the hands of only specialized people will be able to participate. So that's something we thought a lot about, and in some ways, until we have an identity layer that can do things like quadratic voting or something like that, then I'm not sure how we can really stop the centralization. But we've done all that we can.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. And, thinking about the early stages of the network, like how exactly do people get involved with the process today? Like, are there staking pools, or do you delegate to a validator? I know you just said you don't do delegated proof of stake, but any comparisons to networks that do this, where anybody could really get involved with consensus, like Tezos and Decred, where it's very easy, would also be helpful.
Yeah. So I think there's a tricky nomenclature, which is delegated proof of stake, which normally refers to EOS or Tron style, but there's also still delegation in a true proof of stake system. So we allow delegation because ultimately, if let's say I only have $100 worth of one tokens, I still want to stake them, but I don't have enough to actually get a voting share in the protocol. So we want to allow those people to be able to pool their resources together or stake them to someone who they trust to run a voting share on behalf of them. So we definitely have delegation. It's similar in design to Tezos or Cosmos. So that's sort of the way that people can think about it, and that's what they can expect.
Got it. That makes sense. So going on to your IEO, which you mentioned, what happened there? What was the process, and how did the results turn out?
Yeah, so we recently completed our IEO on Binance. It was on end of May, early June. It was really a whirlwind and a huge success for us. We had been observing the trend of IEOs taking place, and it got us very excited because we were at that stage where it started. It was making sense for us to start to get out there in the public more, to start distributing our token, and to list on exchanges. So it was kind of the timing was right, and having looked through all the different possible exchanges that we could do an IEO with, it was clear that Binance was the number one. So that was really our goal, and we applied, and they picked up on us, and we went through a really in-depth due diligence process. It really gives me a lot of faith in the Binance team and the Launchpad itself, because they went 360-degree view of our entire protocol and project, from legal and compliance to the team, the investors, token distribution and valuation, the technology, our marketing plans, partnerships and adoption strategies, the go to market. They asked everything, and it was I kid you not, a whole month long 24/7 process where we were staying up late at night here in the US, and they were waking up in Asia and exchanging. We would work the whole day answering questions from the day before, and they would read it. And by the time we woke up, we had a whole new list of questions to answer. And it was like kind of almost like going through an accelerator, because it first forced us to really focus and answer a lot of questions. But in the end, we I think really resonated with the Binance team, because they're also very execution oriented. So the team culture is really aligned, and I think that by executing really hard on our side, that gave them the faith that when it came to launch our IEO, that we would continue this level of work ethic and really drive through and be successful and actually ship something, because they're also taking a lot of risk on their end by putting their brand name behind you and telling their users to invest in you. So it's a very I think the incentives are pretty aligned throughout the whole process, and we're really happy to be working with Binance, and kind of be now part of the Binance family, because they have such an extended network and will really be able to help us grow, not just through listing. It doesn't stop after the IEO. They're we're going to integrate with Trust Wallet, and they have a whole ecosystem that will just continue to boost us and drive adoption for us.
No, that's incredible. And yeah, the CZ is obviously relentless. The entire Binance team, definitely appears the same way to me. What's your take on the results? You guys, I believe, raised $5 million through the Launchpad, and then you also had an $18 million sale back, I believe, last May.
Yeah, so we raised a seed round last May of roughly 18 million from around 30 different investors, and that was carrying us through this past year, and we still have quite a bit of capital left over from that. But going into we had reserved, our hard cap was actually 30 million from the outset, so we'd reserved extra 12 million worth of our token table for future fundraisers, and it was always our intention to do an ICO, but those dreams kind of evaporated towards the latter half of 2018, as regulations started to come in, and it became very clear that to do so would be really difficult. And that's why the IEO was actually really a blessing, because it kind of came in at the right time as an alternative. And so yeah, we raised 5 million through the IEO. I think it was about 4 times oversubscribed. which was great because it means we had a lot of demand from the public for our token, and we also raised some money from private investors around that time, including Wangxiang, which is a really prominent blockchain company in Asia, and as well as Binance Labs themselves.
That's excellent. So I'm looking at the Binance research report. I'm seeing kind of your allocation and how you guys want to use your funds, and I'm kind of happy that there's only 15% for marketing and 65 for core team and protocol development. That was definitely swapped in the height of the ICO bubble when everyone was focused on just marketing.
Yeah.
That's great. So, I mean, of that money, of that 65% for the core team and protocol development, do you guys have a runway? Like, is this 5 million enough for, the next year of research and design, or do you think this sets you forward forever, or what's your thoughts here?
We're going to be very conservative with the capital we've raised, and it should last us, another 3 to 4 years at the very least, and that excludes us, spending or selling any of the tokens that we have in our table to fund for the future. So I think we're really well set in terms of runway. And the tokens, the remaining tokens, some of them go to the team, but a majority of them will go to actually build the ecosystem and to fund the core protocol research. So I think those are two of the parallel things. Like you need the token to help incentivize people to work on the core protocol and build the functionality that will be the baseline of the whole ecosystem. But at the same time, you need to use some of the tokens to actually incentivize adoption and to get applications up and running. So that's how those tokens will be spent. And we have an extremely long vesting schedule for those tokens. They won't be fully vested for another 6 years. And even within that time frame, it's all about managing it for the long-term future.
Yeah, I agree there. I love that you guys are focused on the long term and the team is clearly aligned with that vesting schedule. So switching off from technical to high level, I know we did it kind of in the reverse for most podcasts, but I really wanted to get what sets you guys apart out of the way first. What's the ultimate goal of Harmony? I mean, I know it's to connect, 10 billion people, but do you guys want to be a platform for dApps and smart contracts? Do you want to be a money? What's your take on all of these conflicting views and ethoses in the space?
That's a really good question. For us, it really is all about adoption and actual use cases and making an impact on people's lives. That said, I think that we're still in the very early days of blockchain. So we have and that's also why we have such a long, outlook. And that kind of plays into our adoption strategy, which I can, jump into briefly if it helps kind of make people understand. But yeah, at the high level, just before I get into that, is very much to be a smart contract platform. And I think it's hard to predict the use cases that will have the most impact, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, right? It's sort of like trying to predict how the internet would unfold, in the early 90s. So rather than do that, we just want to build the best infrastructure possible. And for now, the use cases that we can predict or that seem reasonable really drive hard and try to build adoption in those. So those use cases for us are gaming, decentralized finance, and data sharing. And sort of gaming for us is more near term and high growth potential use case with low risk. And especially, I feel like there's a potential for it to be adopted rapidly in Asia. And so this is sort of the first use case that we really want to go after aggressively. And the nice thing about it is that it has a lot of the same functionalities that you need for DeFi, but it's much lower risk. You're not entrusting, world's like people's assets. It's more about, obviously gamers will care about it, but it's not like their lives are, they're going to ruin, you're going to ruin their lives if there's some flaw or bug. So it allows us to kind of build out a lot of the functionality and test the protocol's throughput and smart contracts and everything, but as a lower risk use case. And then, in the huge, I think DeFi has huge potential, but it's probably more mid to long term. And obviously it's higher risk. So it's something that we want to focus on now and start building out the functionality for now, but I think it's a bit longer term. And the longest term one is definitely data sharing, which is, we want to be able to support applications that allow users to control their own data and then hopefully be able to monetize them or keep them private. It becomes, it kind of flips the paradigm of the data monopolies of Facebook and Google or Tencent, depending on where you are in the world, and allows people to have more sovereignty over the sort of information economy, which I think has kind of run amok and kind of gone off the rails a little bit, as we've seen with Cambridge Analytica and all these scandals of the recent past few years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. And, just diving into the vision and competition a bit, I mean, it's my opinion that basically every smart contract platform and every crypto is in competition for developer mindshare and eyes at the end of the day. What's your take on, building out your network effect to attract developers? I mean, it would seem to me like having both proof of stake and sharding, if cross-shard communications works, is a huge selling point to developers that want to build decentralized apps at scale. But you're also up against some serious contenders that already have a lot of developer mindshare. So I guess what's Harmony's strategy for kind of garnering a nice network effect or developer community?
That's a really good question. So, I mean, on some levels, it starts with fundamentals, which is you want to actually deliver the infrastructure that you promised. And for us, we want it to be high throughput, low latency, and low fees. And so far, we're on track to deliver that ahead of most of the competition. So I think, at least market timing wise, I think we will be pretty well set. But beyond that, we have to, it's not just if you build it, they will come. You have to, find ways of incentivizing developers to actually use the protocol, and it goes a lot deeper. And I actually tweeted about this a while back. I said that money can't buy you love, and that's a lyric from a Beatles song. But I think it really applies to blockchain, especially when you look at communities like EOS and Tron, for example. I feel that they may have a lot of money in their war chest, but it's hard to. I feel like developers are a little more idealistic, and you can't just buy their loyalty. You can't just convince them to build on you by putting a carrot on a stick. So there has to be some sort of ethos and vision that for people to resonate with. I think that's what Ethereum was really successful in doing, is creating this developer culture of sort of that people really resonated with and wanted to be a part of. And I think that's something that we're going to be very focused on, is actually the community aspect and the culture. And Harmony, we try to pose ourselves as the sort of the blockchain for humans, the blockchain that cares about humanity and the future of our world. So hopefully, we have altruistic developers out there who also resonate with that vision. But on the flip side, that's all like the sort of high level, fluffy stuff. But when you get down to it, you also need to. Ethereum had the advantage of being the first mover, so they were just kind of also the de facto. So how, among all these different scalable protocols that are coming up, aside from culture, do you really differentiate yourself? And that gets into we're planning to launch ecosystem funds that are targeted at specific use case verticals. And so I think that will enable us to start to attract talented builders to the protocol who can actually drive some of the early, killer apps. I think it's quality over quantity for us on some level. We'll also be building out a lot of the core, layer 2 functionality that developers have come to expect as part of DeFi ecosystem or in general on any blockchain. That includes decentralized exchanges and stable coins, prediction markets, some of the token standards. So we're going to work very hard on making it as developer friendly as possible, including porting over the tooling from Ethereum. We're supporting EVM. So we're working hard on all different fronts. And I also really like the approach that Blockstack has to have sort of a leaderboard for D applications, where on a monthly basis, the top 10 D apps get, by certain metrics, get rewarded with, the token. And I think that's a really good way to kind of have an ongoing process that drives people to sort of competition. It's like X Prize. They found that by putting up a bounty for something, they ended up getting people to invest as much money, if not more, in trying to actually get the bounty than it would have taken to build it themselves. So there's a lot of different approaches. I think that's a very broad overview of the different ideas that we're focused on.
Got it. That makes sense, and that's a great overview. And building on that, another question for you: how do you feel about Ethereum's roadmap here? I mean, I hate to just use them as the running example here, but they're kind of the giant here. I mean, they just had their phase 0 spec freeze today, and they're planning to launch a lot of things that you guys are either have now or working on. I mean, you guys have proof of stake, Ethereum still proof of work. You guys have sharding, Ethereum doesn't. Granted, you guys don't have the cross-shard communications yet. Do you view like this as a benefit for you guys? Like if Ethereum could help educate the community, it's good for Harmony? Or do you view it more in a competitive stance? Like if they take off, we might have trouble here. I guess, how do you view that?
So I think that Ethereum has some of the best researchers, and really, their ETH 2.0 spec is state of the art, and something that all of the proof of stake and sharding chains, if they're not reading every line of that and learning and gleaning all that they can, then they're really missing out. So we have a lot of respect for their whole team and what they're building. I think that some of the disadvantages that they have is that they are the decentralization, at least of development, I don't think is favorable. I think we are really lucky to have all of our engineers in one room, and that allows our development to happen a lot faster. Another thing that we benefit from is not having a legacy system to sort of transition from. I think it would be tricky for them to actually make that transition from proof of work to proof of stake. I think there'll be it'll be very contentious, and in general, trying to support sort of a legacy blockchain while making a transition to a super complex sharded blockchain, that in and of itself is extremely hard to coordinate. So it's actually really lucky that we're starting from a blank slate. We don't have any sort of tech debt to deal with. So those are some of the ideas off the top of my head, but and I think in general we're executing a lot faster than them, and we'll continue to. We actually can afford to be a little more risky, right? It's sort of like the innovator's dilemma of big companies always kind of being slower to adapt than smaller companies. In this case, Ethereum in some ways is still a startup. But we are, much earlier and have less to lose, so we can be a little more aggressive on our timelines. So I think those are all the differentiations I can come up with.
That makes sense, and that's fair enough. And another question, building on the other side of the competition, which is the incumbents like Amazon and Microsoft and Google Cloud. How do you guys view, the competitive dynamic there? And you're one of the few teams that has, I believe, 3 people from AWS on your team now. I think Eugene, Leo, and Chow, I believe, are all engineers with you guys. How do they, or I don't want you to speak for them, but I mean, how do you guys or they kind of view the competitive dynamics here? Because it's kind of always my opinion, and hopefully others, or maybe not, that if you're not decentralized, you should just be using AWS.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head. We have a lot of engineers from these companies, and we have existing relationships with them. People working on some of these projects. I think I don't really see a clear play for these companies to get into blockchain, and except if they want to run nodes or for permissioned networks. But I don't know if they're intending to actually spin up their own decentralized ledgers. I think, and if they did, it would be more along the lines of what Facebook recently did with Libra. And I mean, Libra, I think, is definitely a huge step forward for the industry, and really has raised the profile of crypto worldwide. But at the end of the day, if you look at it closely, it's not actually necessarily competing. It's not a decentralized blockchain. It's kind of in between, and in that way, it's not quite the full flavor. I know their intention is to decentralize over time, but also starting with such a if you're Facebook and you're starting out and you're doing something as disruptive as crypto, you kind of have a target on your back from regulators and from the establishment. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with the massive pushback against Libra from central banks and governments. So we'll see, but I'm not terribly worried about competition. If anything, I feel like we can collaborate with them by having them support running of easy like one-click deploy for Harmony nodes or in general other blockchain nodes. So they and we run a lot of our infrastructure on AWS and Google Cloud and Azure and these cloud providers. So it's I think they can actually blockchain can actually be a use case for them to have more customers, right? It's a new use case that will perhaps drive more demand for their services. That's my take.
No, that's a great take. Yeah, I'm always interested in the kind of mixture between the existing cloud and decentralized blockchains because to your point, I definitely agree. I think there's a lot of avenues where blockchains could use the existing cloud for maybe storage where people own the storage, kind of like what Blockstack's doing or just to their advantage here.
Definitely. And actually, just to touch on the storage thing, one of our an upcoming partnership we haven't announced yet, they have some very interesting technology that allows you to keep your storage completely encrypted, and so in some ways it allows you to feel safe storing your things on a centralized cloud. This is for sort of like data sharing and data sovereignty. So you can trust that your data is safe even on AWS or Google, and just be sure that that there's no funny business going on. So I think that will some of these problems will get solved soon. In fact,
that makes a lot of sense. And just closing out a couple of quick, faster questions for you. What's the token use case for the Harmony One token? Like, what is the token actually used for on the platform? I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss this.
Definitely. So that's a great question. The One token is used first and foremost for staking. So, when if you stake the token, you're able to participate in consensus, earn block rewards, and also collect fees. And so that brings us to the second use case, which is that the One token will be used to pay for fees on the network, similar to how you pay fees on Bitcoin or you use ETH to pay for gas. So there will be that dimension as well. And the final piece is the on-chain governance. So using the token, you'll be able to vote on any kind of on-chain governance proposals that happen.
That's pretty exciting. So you guys basically have on-chain governance.
Yeah, I think that there's still a lot of work to be done in fleshing out our vision for that. I wouldn't say that we have on-chain governance to the degree of, let's say, Polkadot, who they want to make the actually be able to change the state transition function with on-chain governance. I think that's a bit far. It's very far on the spectrum. Right? I actually just was on a panel last week talking about on-chain governance, and you can go all the way from just signaling with bits from miners, or you can use a vote as just signaling, or it can actually have real ramifications, or you can coordinate you can do the voting on chain, but do the coordination off chain. So there's a whole different spectrum of approaches, and I would say we're more sort of in the middle as far as how dedicated we are to making on-chain governance the be-all and end-all.
That makes a lot of sense. And Nick, just closing out, what are you guys looking forward to over the next couple of months with Harmony?
So we're looking forward to rolling out the next phases of the mainnet and growing our validator community. So if anyone is interested to run a Harmony node, we have a wait list online, so you can register your interest, and we can be in touch with you when opportunities arise. And we're also really excited to release more functionality in terms of smart contracts and get people to actually be building. So we'll have an SDK release in the coming months, And we're really looking forward to all our partners that we have announced and have not yet announced to actually ship and integrate with our blockchain, as well as anyone who's listening that wants to try out a high throughput blockchain and be one of the pioneers along with us. So those are the main highlights, I would say.
It's exciting times. And where can people follow you and learn more about Harmony?
We are very active on Twitter at Harmony Protocol. I'm also on Twitter at Nick White with an 8. We also have a website is harmony.one, and our Telegram and Discord are very active. Telegram more for general community, and Discord for the technical community. You can find those links on our website.
That's awesome. Well, Nick, thanks so much for coming on. It's exciting to follow you guys and see everything that's going on, and I hope to have you back on again soon.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate it, and thanks everyone for listening.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the episode. If you learned anything, please share the episode on Twitter and LinkedIn. Feel free to tag us, and visit delphidigital.io to learn more about our research.